waiting for the glue on the bulkhead and such to dry, we can turn our attention to the fins. Alright, these appear to be basswood, or basswood, however you like to pronounce it. And the first thing we'll do is just sand the surfaces here with some 320 to 400 grit sandpaper. And you can do it while they're all still in. Now, if your fins have popped out, you can pop them back in, or you can just do this individually. We're just using some very fine sandpaper here to give us a smooth start. Once you have them to their desired smoothness here, you can cut these out, although mine are so loose they're just kind of falling out here. But if you need to, just cut the little nubs there with your hobby knife. Okay, now these have got some unusual shapes to them here. Alright, so this is the root edge along here, but it also tapers inward to accommodate the tail cone that we've built and put onto the engine mount. So when you're sanding these, you got to be careful that you don't sand out this change here. All right, so it actually should be bent there. And then if you are trying to go a mile high or break the sound barrier, you're going to want to sand a complete airfoil into these, or as near as you can. So round over the leading edges here. And then as you come to the tip edge out in here, you can either keep it rounded, or you can kind of adjust that into a taper here, or you could leave this part square, and then you'll want to taper the back end, the trailing edge here as well. Now, I'm not going to try and shoot this a mile high, because most likely doing so would cause me to lose it. Breaking the sound barrier might be fun, but it's also going to end up in a very high altitude, which would also cause me to lose it. So I am going to round my leading edge here, and then kind of decide as I go along what I'm going to do with the tip edge. The trailing edge, though, I'm just going to leave squared off. Okay, because that does give a stronger fin, but you don't get quite as good aerodynamics. I'm going to start with 150 grit sandpaper here. If you want to work a little faster, you can use 100 grit. Just be careful that you don't overshoot and sand off too much. And I'm just using a simple block of wood here as a sanding block. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is just take the nubbins off the root edge here. And it doesn't take much. Okay, and again, we don't want to change the shape of the root edge. That bend there is supposed to be there. All right, and then same thing out here on the leading edge. All right, and then down here on the trailing edge. Okay. And if you just want this to be easy and look nice on the launch pad, you can just leave it like this. I am going to go ahead and round this though. Now again, this also has a curve here, which is going to make rounding a little more difficult, in this curve down here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just knock down the edge, so kind of round over the edges here on each side. And then do the same on the other side. Okay. And then you want to check this often in cross section. So right now that looks mostly flat yet, with just a little bit of rounding in the corners. All right, and then we're just going to continue this, and as I go, I'm just leaning in the sandpaper a little bit on each edge so that it moves toward the middle. Okay, if we come back there, all right, now we're a little more tapered, a little more rounded. And we just keep doing that on both sides until we're fully rounded over. Okay, so that looks pretty good there. And then I'm going to go up to some 220 and just sand that a little smoother. And that shouldn't take too much. And then up to 320. In this case, I've got it on a sanding tee rather than a sanding block, but it'll still do the same job. Okay, and that fin then is ready to mount. Now, if you would like to use a sanding sealer or other type of sealer on this, you can either do it after they're mounted or at this stage here. If you're using sanding sealer, I prefer to do it at this point here. But because this is basswood, it really doesn't need a lot of sealing. And I've found that if I just use a filling sandable primer on this, that's usually good enough to get a pretty smooth finish. So I'll wait on that part until after we get the fins on the rocket. The other two fins I will finish the same way, but I'll do that off camera and then come back. At this point we are ready to put on the fins, and so I'm going to take the shock cord here and move that back up to where it's supposed to be. So we'll just feed this in. There we go, finally. Alright, and I'm going to take a little bit of tissue and put that up the engine mount here, just so the cord doesn't come out that way. And then we'll take the cord here and wrap it up and put it down here. Alright, and then also go ahead and put a little bit of tissue in there just so it stays put. The instructions recommend using a fin alignment guide, so I'm going to use this one that Apogee also produces. They make these for each different tube size, and I do a lot of BT60 rockets, so this is coming very handy. Right, and back here on, remember we made our lines here. I'm going to go ahead and, using a fin as a guide here, roughen up the areas where the fins are going to go. And it doesn't take much, just a couple of strokes there. Just gonna make sure I'm on the right lines. But that'll just give a better surface for the glue to grip. Okay. Now we are going from wood to both paper and to plastic here, and you can do this in a couple of ways. You can either just use wood glue for the whole thing, or you can use wood glue and some super glue there, which I will attempt. Now it's going to mean I do this a little bit differently. So if you've seen my other videos, I usually use wood glue and I'll put that onto the rocket, pull it back off, let it get tacky, and then put it back on again. That's going to be difficult to do if I'm using the super glue here. So instead, I'm going to go ahead and use my fin alignment guide at the beginning. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stick that in there so it's ready. And then I'm going to have my glue ready here. Alright, and the main thing is here, don't get a great big glob of glue. We just want a fairly thin film that will dry quickly. And then we'll reinforce this with fillets later on. Alright, and then I'm going to take my super glue here, and this is gel type once more, and just run that down the part that's going to go on the boat tail. Alright, I'm going to put this through. And then this should be flush with the aft end of my tail cone there. Alright, I'm going to allow that to dry now for at least 10 minutes. And then I'll repeat the same thing for the other two fins and do all that off camera. Here I have all of the fins attached. The glue needs to continue to harden before we do anything else with this, but we will be putting on epoxy fillets. So some of these have some little gaps in there, and the epoxy should fill that in quite nicely. The same is true over here of our retention threaded rod. Most of this is going to get covered in epoxy as well. Now this nose cone was made in two pieces, and there's a seam here and a seam here. And there are a couple things you can do about this. One is nothing. In fact, a lot of people just ignore it and paint it and don't worry about it. I like to at least sand down any high spots here. And if I have really pronounced low spots, I will fill those with a putty here. So this is plastic model contour putty. There are several brands of it. Mine is Testers, but if you look at other brands of paint, they usually make their own. Okay, and the way this works is you just smooth it into the low spots here, let it dry for about 30 to 60 minutes, and then you can sand that and then reapply it if necessary. So if you really don't like the seams and grooves, this is a good thing to use, but it is going to add to your build time. Generally, I just take these and wet sand them with 220 and then up to 400 grit sandpaper. The wet sanding prolongs the life of the sandpaper. It also washes away the material that's being sanded, so it actually goes quicker. So I'm going to go do that off camera and then come back and let you see the results. Here's what it looks like after sanding with 220, then 320, then 400 grit sandpaper. And most of the lines are completely gone there. You can still see a little bit of a valley there. And over on the other side, even less there. Okay, so if you really want that perfect finish, you can sand it some more and use a little bit of the contour putty in there. But I'm satisfied with this the way it is. Now, even if you don't care about the seams, I would recommend that you lightly sand this with 400 grit sandpaper, because it'll help the paint stick to it better. The glue on my fins has fully dried, and before we do fillets, we're going to put on the launch lug here. Now this has to go 6.5 inches from the base of the main body tube. Okay, so we'll just take this, and this is our launch lug line. Alright, and I'm just going to make a mark here at 6.5 inches. Now, optionally, you can taper the launch lug so that it's slanted at each end, and this improves aerodynamics a little bit. You can freehand this with an X-Acto knife or with a razor saw here. I've actually got this handy-dandy little miter box here, and I'm going to use it. Now this is meant to go on the edge of a counter here, so let me see if I can do this. Try that again. It didn't go all the way through. I see. I need a deeper saw for this. Okay, here I've got a little bit deeper saw, and this should do the trick for us. Alright, now the only problem is when you reach the end of these things, you're basically scraping right against the aluminum there, and that tends to dull the saws a bit. Alright, now I'm just going to move this over to the other side. Actually, I'm going to flip it over. It's hard to do that one right-handed. Okay, basically you just want to get that lined up so that they're going to come out evenly. Okay, pretty close to even. Might be a little bit off. Alright, and then you can take some fine sandpaper here and just kind of smooth those out a little bit. Alright, and we can do a little more to clean those up after it's on the rocket. We will be using epoxy fillets for this as well. Now, like we did with the fins and the tube, I'm also going to roughen up this a little bit. We'll glue it on with wood glue, but then we'll use epoxy for the fillets. Okay, and we're going to roughen up just beyond our mark here. And then I'm going to put this on a stand. Okay, and then taking some wood glue here, just put a bead of glue across the length of my launch lug here. Again, you don't need much. Okay, we'll put fillets on it later to reinforce it. Okay, now once that's on, we'll look at it straight down and then sight through it. Okay, making sure the line, the launch lug, and the rocket are all going in the same direction. The glue on the launch lug is dry, and we're ready to start doing fillets. So I'm making up a small batch of 5-minute epoxy here. And as much as we like to try and get them all done at once, it's not going to happen that way. So basically plan on doing one feature or one item at once. And so I'm going to do the launch lug first, and then we'll go on and do each fin. So don't try and make up epoxy for all of the fins and the launch lug. Just make up a small amount at a time. Alright, and you want to wear some gloves for this, so you don't end up with hypersensitivity reactions later. You'll also want a little bit of alcohol here. Rubbing alcohol is fine. Okay, so here I'm just, first of all, just run epoxy here along my launch lug. Now if you want this to be really built up where the whole thing just kind of flows into the body tube, don't try and do it in one setting here. So put on a layer, let it harden, put on another layer. As if you try and do one big thick layer, it's going to run. Okay, now once you've got it in there, you can either smooth it in with the applicator, or what I found is a much better way is just put a little bit of alcohol on your finger of your gloves, and then use that to smooth in the epoxy. And you can also remove any excess there. And what's happening here is the alcohol thins the epoxy, and it also prevents it from sticking to your gloves very much. So it lets you get a really nice smooth finish. And then if you do have excess that's running around here like mine is, you can easily take that back up again. Okay. Now go ahead and wipe up any excess here, both epoxy and alcohol, because if you leave the alcohol set for too long, it will get into the paper and cardboard there and cause it to bubble. Okay. So there's the launch lug. We'll go ahead and let that set for a while, and when we come back we'll start in on the fins. The epoxy on the launch lug has set, and so I'm going to move now to the fins. And I'm going to do facing fins at a time. So I'm going to do this fillet and this fillet. And here, if I've got some leftover epoxy, I'll start in on the motor retainer there. I'm going to do this in the same way I did the launch lug. So we'll just run some epoxy here into the corner. Now on bigger models, I usually mask off the fins in the body tube and leave like a 1/4 inch gap. Where this one's got the bent fins for the tail cone, that's a little less impractical, so I'm just going to freehand this. Now in this case I'm going to let this set for about 30 seconds so that it self-levels a little bit, and then we'll come back and smooth it in. Okay, a little time has passed, and so now we'll go ahead and level these, or smooth these I should say. We're not really leveling them. Now I want to make sure that there's none down inside the motor mount there. And then just as before, we'll use a tissue here to remove the excess from places where we don't really want it. Okay, now the epoxy in here has actually kind of leveled itself out okay. I think I am going to leave that mostly alone. And we'll just let it harden that way. Okay, so once again, we're going to do some hurry up and waiting. I'm going to do the rest of the fins off camera and then come back. While I'm waiting for the epoxy fillets to harden, I'm going to come to the nose cone here and start painting it. Now, the color scheme in the package is kind of a red and blue color scheme. And if you've been following my channel lately, you'll have noticed I've made a lot of red, white, and blue rockets for the past month or two. And I'm kind of tired of it. Instead, I'm going to make this kind of Kestrel colored. So I'm going to use some browns and tans and ivories and things like that to give it kind of the coloration of a Kestrel. Now, the rocket's not going to actually look like a Kestrel, but you get the idea here. The only drawback to this is those colors are going to tend to blend into underbrush and stuff, so I want to make sure I've got a really good, clear recovery field when I go to launch this. As with the nose cone, I'm going to go ahead and paint the payload section while we're waiting for fillets to dry as well. Here we can see that all of the fillets have hardened, and they're looking pretty good. We had a little bit of stray stuff here, we can fix that later. Okay, the engine retainer came out fairly well. Now if you want to get rid of the threads there, which theoretically could cause increased wind resistance and drag, you can fill that in either some more epoxy or some plastic contour putty, but keep in mind you need enough bare threads here to retain the motor. Okay, so I'm going to let this fully cure for several hours and then give it a shot of primer and see what areas still need work. Here's the rocket after 2 coats of primer, and I ran out of my usual filling sandable primer here and used a different one. I'm not as happy with it. It tends to run a bit more. So I'm going to do some sanding to this and then continue with adding the color spray paint to it. The paint on my nose cone is done, and recall that I am putting this in kind of Kestrel colors instead of the red and blue scheme that's on the package. I'm also going to add to this a snap swivel, which we'll use to attach the parachute here onto the nose cone. And if you've seen my other videos, you'll know why. It just makes it a whole lot easier to keep the parachute untangled, to switch parachutes, etc. The main thing is your snap swivel does need to be large enough that it can go onto the nose cone's eyelet and still move around there like that. So this one's fine. Okay, we do have to assemble the parachute here, unlike some kits like Estes and stuff, they have them pre-made. And the biggest challenge is finding the opening. Here we go. Now this parachute can be cut to different sizes depending on the size of the kit here. So we'll just unfold this first of all. I'll move this other stuff aside. Okay, so this parachute can be used as a 12, a 15, or an 18 inch. And we'll make a quick check of our instructions here. Okay, they say to cut it to 15 inches. So we're going to use this middle dotted line here. Now we're going to take this reinforcements here, these donut looking stickers, and these are going to go in each of the corners. And now take a pencil or some other non-knife-like instrument and poke through each of these holes. Now I've had readers or viewers ask me why I don't just use a knife, and the reason for that is a knife, if I go too far, will easily cut the reinforcements, whereas something that pokes through kind of in a gouging fashion rather than a slicing fashion just pushes the plastic aside. And so the short answer is you're less likely to ruin the parachute. Alright, so there I've got all my holes. Next we're going to take the lines here, and so just remove this tape carefully. This may take a sharp object. Be really careful that you don't cut the shroud lines here. Okay, now this starts off as one great big long piece. And so we have to carefully kind of disentangle it here. Okay, so now go ahead and get an end between finger and thumb of each hand here. Okay, so I've got finger and thumb, and then take your two middle fingers here and wrap the opposite string on each hand like this. So you don't have to wrap it around, you're just holding it there. And then you're going to pull these apart, okay, until you get now on one end a loop and a free string, and over here on the other end we'll have a loop and a free string. Okay, now go ahead and cut one of those loops first of all, and then go ahead and cut everything on that end even. Okay, now I'm going to hold those three loose ends. Right, I'm going to run my finger now over all of those shroud lines while still holding this guy even. Okay, come back up here. You just don't want to lose tension on this at all. Okay, it captured some glue on the other end. Okay, then we'll come all the way down here until we reach our loop. Alright, we've got a little excess there, but it's not enough to worry about. I'm just going to cut those even as well. So now I have three pieces of string here that are all the same length. Set those aside and just take one of them. And you're going to tie this between two adjacent corners. So we'll just poke it through here. And the trick here is to try and keep the knots as even as possible. All right, I'm just going to tie a double knot or two half hitches into this. All right, and then kind of pull it taut and bring that knot closed. All right, I'm going to go to the other end of that string. I'm going to do the same thing here. And it doesn't matter which side you go through, the top or the bottom side of the sheet. Okay, and do that. And then we're going to repeat that all the way around. Once you have those all tied on, go ahead and flip it over. Okay, and then you're going to gather all of the loops here around one finger. All right, and then I'm going to grab the middle of the parachute sheet. Going to get all the wrinkles out there. And if we did this correctly, all of those corners should be in about the same position, and they are, which means we got all our shroud lines about the same length. If you get one that's really different than the other two, go ahead and untie that and try again. Okay, over here on my finger, I'm going to hang on to those loops so they can't change lengths relative to each other. Alright, and I'm going to take those and kind of squish them down. I'm going to pass all of the loops of the shroud lines through the swivel end, the non-clip end of my snap swivel. All right, again, I'm always holding on to the shroud lines somewhere so they don't move. Now I'm going to pass the entire snap swivel through the loops, pull the loops back down toward the parachute here, and then I'm going to just pull those taut. Okay, and I'm going to get that nice and tight down there. I'm going to close this for a moment. All right, and then I'm going to recheck on my parachute here to make sure that I'm all in the same spot. And it looks like they actually moved a little bit. Alright, if that's the case, you can come back here, loosen the knot, I've had way too much caffeine today. Okay, come back here and readjust these. And I've just loosened the knot here so that it can move upon itself. If it's really bad, you may have to actually go through and take the snap swivel back off. But it looks like this is going to work for me. Alright, so now I'm going to let that retighten. Corners are good. Everything's good there. Once you've got that where you want it, then go ahead and put a little dab of white glue or wood glue right on that knot. And it doesn't take much. We just want a little bit there. We're going to work it into the knot so that it does not come undone. Okay, and then when this is all dry and we're ready to fly, simply unclip this, hook it onto the nose cone, clip it back up. Something else to keep in mind, remember that this rocket does have a payload section, and if you're going to routinely fly a relatively heavy payload, then you may want to cut this at the 18-inch version rather than the 15-inch version. If you're not going to fly payloads, then if an 18-inch is going to give you a long duration, but it also means a greater chance of losing the rocket either to distance or to rocket-eating trees. Something else we can do while we're waiting for paint and primer to dry is to build the 24mm adapter here. And so for this you'll need the 24mm tube. We've got 2 green centering rings, a green engine block, and then the last ring that was on this cardstock here. This is the D ring. All right, go ahead and pop that out if you haven't done so already. Okay, and the first thing we do is we're going to add a bead of glue on the forward end. So whichever end you do this on, it becomes the forward end. Alright, and then one of these green rings will go on that spot. And we're going to mount that flush. Okay, so it's just going to go like that. You can go ahead and smooth remaining glue into a fillet there. Okay, next we're going to measure 1/2 inch or 13mm from the aft end. That'll be right there. We're going to make a little mark there. Alright, we're going to put some glue just past that mark. Not the straightest I've ever done, but you get the idea here. Okay, and so the other green ring is going to go there, and that mark then should be, or the ring should be ahead of the mark. Alright, so there's my mark. Right there. Alright, and once again, smooth excess glue into a fillet. It's trying to go on there crooked. Okay, then we're going to take a little more glue. We're going to put it right here on the other side of that aft green ring. And this is where that cardboard ring is going to go in. So that's going to be an aft style retaining ring there. Okay, and then we've got the motor block ring. Now this is for using black powder motors. If you're going to use composite motors, actually most of them will still fit in this as long as it's not longer than the tube. And so I've got, for an example, an Aerotech 2460 reloadable motor. It will still work in here even with this ring in there, and so will most of the disposable composite motors. It's only the really long ones that won't work this way. So I'm going to go ahead and mount this because I will use black powder motors with it. Alright, now I don't want to get glue down inside the tube, so here I'm going to glue the outside of the ring thusly. Alright, and then we'll put that in, and this way any excess glue will get forced to the outside instead of down inside the motor mount. Alright, now that should be flush. Okay, and so if you're using the longer motors, the E-series motors from Estes, you use it just like this. If you're using the C11s or the D12s, you'll need this spacer here. And I don't remember if this came with the kit or if I just had it floating around. You can get these from Estes and Rocketry and lots of different manufacturers. Okay, and this would just slide in first, and then you can put one of the shorter 24 millimeter motors in there. Okay, otherwise, once you've got the motor in there, then you're going to have to friction fit it or tape around the outside, and then this whole assembly will go into the motor mount of the rocket. Alright, so this guy is still being painted. It'll go in here like this. Alright, and then I'm not going to force this because it's still wet, but the retaining ring will then go on the outside there, and then you can just screw this down like you would a normal motor. Almost forget one step here. We do need to put a thin fillet on the ring here. Alright, now we don't want this too thick or it'll have trouble being retained by the nut. Alright, so just smooth that in, and we'll let that dry too. Here I have everything painted. So here's the main body tube here. It's in they call it an ivory silk color. And then we've got kind of a tan here for the payload section, and a little bit more of a reddish brown here for the nose cone. And so all it's left to do is to put everything together. So I'm going to take the tissue out of the body tube here. And set that aside. Okay, our shock cord is simply tied on to the loop here. And I'm going to leave a fairly large amount of free end there, so it's less likely to come unattached. If you want, you can put some super glue on that knot as well, but I'm just going to leave it like that. And then our parachute that we did earlier, this will simply clip on to the loop there. Okay, and for now I'm just going to fold this and tuck it away. You can use your own favorite folding method for deployment. Right now, if this is going to be prepped for launch, you will need some sort of protection in here, whether it's wadding or dog bar for reusable Nomex parachute protector. Okay, just make sure you do that so you don't melt your parachute. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're going to use this with an actual payload, you probably want to go to a larger parachute. Okay, so that'll slip together like that. And then we've got our nose cone on top. Now, you'll want to either use some masking tape on the shoulder here to get a really tight fit, Or what I'll probably do is put a single plastic reusable rivet in there, and that way I don't lose the nose cone. Often what will happen with a payloader like this is the ejection charge goes off, it reaches the end of its shock cord, and the nose pops off and keeps on going. I've lost nose cones more than once that way. So all we have left now are the decals. To apply the decals, I've got the decal sheet here, and I've also got a basin of water into which I've put a single drop of dishwashing detergent, and that will allow me to place and replace the decals a lot easier. Okay, now here's the original artwork that came with this, and again they use a red and blue type of decor with this. So I may not use all of these decals. I may decide that the blue just doesn't go with my paint. But I'll definitely use the Kestrels here. So we'll start with them. Alright, so I simply peel one of these off. And then we're going to dip it in the water here. And then just kind of squeegee off the excess. And temporarily now the adhesive is much less sticky. Now this is going to go on the payload section, and for now I just need to get it straight and in line with the tube. I'll get the opposite one in line in a bit, because I can turn this if I need to. Okay, so that looks reasonably straight. Okay, and now I'm going to go 180 degrees here, or what I hope is, and we'll put the other one on. Same way. Okay, so get those bills lined up as much as we can. And that should go about there. Okay, I'm going to bring this forward just a bit. That looks like it's going to be pretty good. Okay, so once you've got these where you want them, then just go ahead and take tissues or paper towel or a rag, whatever you've got, and just squeegee all the water out, as well as any air. Oops. Careful there on those edges. And after about 24 to 48 hours, that adhesive will become permanent once more. Okay, so now I'm going to rotate this around so that they should be on either side of my brown colored fin there. Now I think I will try, I'll try at least two of the fin chevrons here. I'm going to start out with them probably on my light fins instead of the dark one there. I kind of like the dark one all by itself. Okay, so this is just kind of following in between the curvature of the fin and the curvature of the tail cone there. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of blotting here, but not completely forcing it down yet. Okay, and then I'm going to do the other fin there. And here the trick is to try and match it as closely as possible with what I did on the first one. Okay. It's a little bit aft. So here's where having that detergent helps. I can bump it up a little bit. Now that is too far. Let's try this one. Okay, and we'll go with that. Once more, squeegee out the water. Okay, I'm going to do the other two off camera and then come back. I decided that I liked the chevrons on the fins here, so I went ahead and did all 3 fins with them. But I didn't like the stripes so much, so I left those off. Up here on the payload section, we have our Kestrel decals. Looks like a little bit of air bubbles there. Those will work out. Okay, and same thing here, my Apogee decal, and then right above that I've got a 2.5 millimeter reusable rivet that's holding the nose cone on. Okay, and then before we come to an end and forget it here, I'm going to put this washer and the nut on the engine retainer here so we don't lose those. And fortunately these don't extend beyond the fins, so you can still stand your rocket up without this getting in the way. So there we have the Kestrel. Hope you had a good time building this. The motor retainer and tail cone were a little bit challenging, but we came through okay. Hope you have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.